unanimous consent to convene the meeting, at which I would anticipate we would hear the presentation from Madame Hull, and then we would accommodate members' wishes for voting, whether they want to return to the House or vote virtually. Ms. Gray, as Vice Chair.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, depending on how long the intervention will be from the witness, we do need to leave here in 10 minutes in order to get there in time. So, if the intervention is 5 or 10 minutes, then she'll be complete. If not, she'll have to complete her intervention once we come back. So, because we do need to get the vote is at 3:50. So the bell started ringing at 3:20. So, and it's a 30-minute bell. So we actually have. We've actually got 8 minutes to hear from the witness, and then stop, and then we can start up again. Would be my suggestion.
The witness is indicating they'd prefer to have your full allotted time.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I was saying that the witness would have her full allotted time. It would just be broken up, right? So she would start and speak for 8 minutes, and then it would start again once we're back. So you would have the full allotted time.
Are you okay with that, Ms. Hull?
I have 3 points to bring, and I would rather you receive them all at once, if that's okay. My presentation was 12 minutes long. Is that okay? Thank you.
What is the
Mr.
wish?
Chair, if I may, so we need to leave in 8 minutes. So whether we recess now and then come back and the witness does her entirety after that, or she speaks now for 8 minutes and then for another 4.
Yeah. Okay, what we're going to do then is simply recess until the members return from the vote, at which time we'll begin your presentation. It will shorten the Q&A period, but you will have your time. So with that, the meeting was not, I did not convene the meeting, so we will only convene the meeting at roughly what time, Ms. Gray? What do you have as...
Well, I guess, Mr. Chair, after the voting is complete and the vote is
After
in,
the
then we
voting
always
is complete
have
and
10
announced
minutes
10
to
minutes?
get back here. So whatever time that is. Yeah.
Okay, so committee members, we'll respect the voting protocol that's in place to convene the meeting 10 minutes after the Speaker has announced the vote in the House of Commons. Agreed? Thank you. Committee members, welcome back. We were suspended because we had began the meeting. There was agreement to begin the meeting, but we suspended to allow people to vote and to accommodate our first witness. So I'm going to go directly to Mallory. I'll just indicate this is meeting number 67 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October the 17th, 2022, the committee will begin its study on financialization of housing. Beginning with the first panel is Madame Mallory Jose Hull. You have the floor, Madame.
Great. Thank you very much. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairs, and honorable committee members, hello. My name is Marie-Josée Hull, and I'm honored to be here with all of you as Canada's first federal housing advocate. I'm honored to be here to discuss the work we have been doing on the financialization of housing with a knowledgeable team of researchers who are joining us today. Before I continue, I wish to acknowledge the privilege of speaking with you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation.
I emphasize the uniqueness of the federal housing advocate position, not only within Canada, but globally. And it's my job to be a watchdog for housing and homelessness in Canada. My position is independent and nonpartisan, and this is new territory for all of us, and I welcome the opportunity to work together. Ultimately, I'm here to drive system-wide change so that government legislation, policies, and programs uphold the human right to adequate housing. And a big part of that, of course, is the need to address the financialization of housing in Canada. Aujourd'hui,
Today, I would like to talk about how the financialization of housing, otherwise described as corporate investment in housing, is a serious human rights issue that must be addressed as we seek to correct Canada's housing crisis. I will explain why in 3 key points. First, the financialization of housing is a widespread issue that has negatively shaped Canada's housing system. Second, the financialization of housing is harming people in Canada and is a serious human rights issue. And finally, curbing the financialization of housing is a key way governments can help address Canada's larger housing crisis.
Point about how the financialization of housing is an issue that is widespread and that has negatively shaped Canada's housing system. To understand exactly this, we have to understand the financialization of housing, and it is essentially the process of treating housing as a financial commodity and an asset for profit. The financialization of housing works in various ways, but the motive is always profit-driven. And the main actors are financial entities such as real estate investment trusts, known as REITs, as well as pension funds, asset managers, and private equity funds. Corporations turn housing into a financial product in a few ways, and for one, they raise the price of rental units to extract maximum profits. Another way is to package housing into investment funds whose shares are traded on global markets. And we're also seeing the growing role of for-profit operators in long-term care sector. So it's not new that these buildings are privately owned. What is new is that they are increasingly now owned by large institutional investors and financial firms whose focus is making maximum returns for shareholders. Someone's home can become one small part of a giant multi-billion-dollar portfolio of assets that's being leveraged to acquire even more assets. So this is what I mean when I call this problem widespread. And the scope of financialization of housing in Canada has expanded dramatically since the mid-90s, when regulatory changes enabled the creation of real estate investment trusts and allowed pension funds to invest in financial markets and instruments. And these changes took place just as Canada's federal social housing program was terminated, resulting in a steep decline in the development of new nonprofit, affordable, co-op, and social housing. And as a result of these factors, low-income and vulnerable households are finding it increasingly difficult to find affordable, accessible, and adequate rental housing in Canada. Nos chercheurs montrent aujourd'hui.
So, our research shows that today an estimated 20 to 30% of Canada's purpose-built rental housing is now owned by institutional investors. Meanwhile, financialized companies make up 15 of the top 20 biggest owners of long-term care and seniors housing in Canada. I want to highlight that these figures only account for what is traceable. Right now, there is very little disaggregated data or comprehensive public reporting on this issue. This lack of transparency is a problem.
Accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, as housing was identified as a safe investment during a period of economic instability in Canada. Canada will not be able to build our way out of this housing crisis. We are losing affordable housing units faster than we can build them. And according to housing researcher Steve Pomeroy, between 2011 and 2016, for every unit of affordable rental that was built in Canada, 15 were lost. So financialization is one major contributor to this loss. So if the housing crisis is going to be addressed, we must stop the loss. So when we consider this issue from a bird's eye perspective, we see how financialization of housing is a widespread issue that has been negatively shaping Canada's housing system with very little oversight. And then when we look closer at the individual level, we see how it's also causing real harm to individuals, families, and communities. We're talking about people's everyday lives. So this brings me to my second point. Financialization is causing real harm to people in Canada, and it is a serious human rights issue. You've heard me say that housing is a human right, and it's really important to understand what that means. The right to housing, it's not just a slogan. It's not just an ethereal nice to have. It's not something to aspire to. It is a fundamental human right enshrined in international law under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which Canada signed in 1976, and today in Canada, the right is also enshrined in our domestic law and reaffirmed under the National Housing Strategy Act of 2019. So this means that every single person in Canada has the right to live in a safe, secure, affordable home that meets their needs and to be free from discrimination or harassment. And under international human rights law, there are 7 criteria that define adequate housing, including affordability, security of tenure, and habitability, among others. So everyone in Canada has the right to a home that meets all 7 criteria. So when we understand that and then consider the detrimental effects of financialization, it's clear that this trend is violating people's right to adequate housing in Canada. And it's contributing to housing unaffordability, and it's worsening housing conditions. It is leading to evictions and displacement. So our research found that financial firms often target acquiring rental buildings where rents are below local averages, and they extract maximum revenue by cutting services to tenants, increasing rents and fees, or evicting existing tenants in order to dramatically increase the rents for new renters, and undermining the affordability, security of tenure, and habitability of buildings it's not just a byproduct of financialization, it is a deliberate strategy that firms use to increase profits. So in fact, les prix ont augmenté.
So once the prices have been raised, these affordable units are forever lost. Meanwhile, the unhealthy low vacancy rates in many cities leave people with no choice than to pay more for these units, and people who are evicted from their affordable units are forced to look for housing far from their community, competing for a rapidly dwindling supply for affordable units. The research confirms
and disadvantaged groups such as vulnerable seniors, low-income tenants, people with disabilities, members of Black communities, recent immigrants and refugees, and lone parent families. And there is also well-documented connection between financialization and increased morbidity and mortality in long-term care facilities. And this has not only affected residents' human right to adequate housing, it has violated their fundamental human right to dignity, security of the person, and life. So, again,
I can't hear the witness.
the key word in all of this is harm.
Can you hear it now, Mr. Cadeau? Okay.
This is why Canada needs to treat financialization as a serious human rights issue and also as a key component in addressing the housing crisis overall. So this brings me to my third and final point, how curbing the financialization of housing is a key step for governments to take. And it's not just the smart thing for governments to do, it is actually their obligation under international human rights law and now in Canadian law under the National Housing Strategy Act. So realizing people's right to adequate housing means that governments must act to ensure that all available resources are mobilized towards the most disadvantaged group as a matter of priority, that all appropriate means, including policies and legislation, are taken to ensure adequate housing for these groups, and a coordinated all-of-government approach is implemented across all levels of government. So first and foremost, any government responses to financialization must be aligned with these obligations. And one of my duties as federal housing advocate is to monitor that the right to adequate housing is being fulfilled in Canada. So
we know that the financialization of housing is complex, but we also know that a range of effective solutions exist, including those identified by our research.
Of housing with deliberate changes and a recalibration of the National Housing Strategy. And the federal government, with the advice of this committee, can demonstrate federal leadership on the issue and highlight how other levels of government will also need to act. So financialization is systemic and pervasive and will require a coordinated approach to curb the harm that it is causing, and it will require immediate actions followed by long-term ongoing strategies to ensure adequate housing. So in particular, I invite this committee to look at options such as tracking the ownership of financialized housing stock, better monitoring of tenant rights before, during, and after the acquisition of properties to prevent evictions, human rights violations, and harassment, expanding the supply of non-market housing, tax reforms that make financialization less profitable, especially for REITs, and regulating the involvement of pension funds that invest in financialization. I also urge the committee to call industry witnesses to account for their practices that undermine housing affordability, security of tenure, and habitability with data about their strategies and their profit margins. And throughout it all, we trust that the voices of people in Canada and those whose right to adequate housing is being violated will continue to be heard. So the bottom line is that addressing the financialization crisis in Canada is integral to addressing the housing crisis in Canada. And because when we realize the right to adequate housing for all of Canada benefits, our economy benefits, communities benefit, people benefit. Alors, je suis ici.
So I'm here to work with you and with all levels of government to address financialization and realize the right of adequate housing for everyone in Canada. Thank you for your time, and I welcome your questions.
Merci, Madame Hull. We'll now begin with Ms. Gray, and I believe we'll only get one round in this particular panel. So, Ms. Gray, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witness for being here today. In your opening remarks, you had referred a couple times to the housing crisis, and so I just want to confirm that you believe that we're in a housing crisis, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Now, we had the housing minister, Minister Hussen, here before committee just a few months ago, and my conservative colleague, Mr. Aitchison, asked him several times if he believed that we were in a housing crisis, and Minister Hussen refused to acknowledge it as such. Are you concerned that the government is not formally recognizing the present situation as a crisis?
I am concerned that when I travel across this country, I'm seeing encampments in some areas for the very first time, that people are unhoused, so that is a crisis. people can't afford rents. And again, encampments, which is another project that I'm working on, is a physical manifestation of exactly how broken our housing and homelessness system is in this country. But we do have a national housing strategy, and we have a National Housing Strategy Act.
Right.
So it is about government really recognizing housing as a human right. It has legally, but it's acting on it and taking their responsibilities and ensuring that all resources as soon as possible are prioritizing those who need it the most. And that is the people that we're seeing in encampments, and those are the people that are in housing precarity.
Great, thank you. And so, again, going back to the fact that the minister is not acknowledging that we're in a housing crisis, I would assume that, as the federal housing advocate, that would be a concern of yours, that the minister is actually not acknowledging that we're in a housing crisis.
Our job is to, to write reports, and our latest report has been sent to the minister, and that report, as well as his written response, is expected to be tabled in front of Parliament within 30 days. So hopefully you'll see that soon.
Okay, well, hopefully the minister will acknowledge that we're in a housing crisis based on information that he's getting. And I just wanted to tag on, you were mentioning encampments. I know that even in my riding of Kelowna Lake Country, it's something that we're seeing more of, and public safety, as well as what's happening. It's a big concern right across the country. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that. One of the other things I wanted to ask you was the Liberals have been championing their latest program. It's the so-called First Home Savings Account. And it's a tool for solving the gap in home ownership for first-time home buyers. And yet many Canadians who already can't afford a home are struggling just to make ends meet to pay for their rent and afford groceries, let alone save money for a down payment on a home. So do you believe this savings account will actually make a difference for first-time home buyers?
Thank you for your question. Mr. Chair, we're here today to talk about the financialization of housing, and it's important to look at the housing system as a whole and the impact of home ownership, or people's inability to access home ownership, certainly has an impact on the rental market. But today we're here to talk about the research that was commissioned by my office to talk about, the impacts of financialization of housing. However, the financialization of housing has also targeted homes.
Right.
So there is relevance to this question in what we're talking about today.
Thank you. One of the you have referenced that we can't build our way out of this crisis, and you have acknowledged that we're in a housing crisis. So everything being equal, if the amount of a product increases, its market price will tend to fall. So would you agree that part of the situation is that we do need that we need more building of houses in order to bring prices down at some point?
This is not how housing works.
Okay.
What we're talking about, the housing crisis and, the human right to housing, is those that need it the most. And the housing, any new housing that's built, whether it's rental or single detached homes for mortgages, will cost more than something that's already built. And yet we are, these new construction, unless they come with subsidies, will not create the affordability that's needed. And, the market needs to be regulated. In Canada, we have a market-driven economy, and it's the role of government to put in protections in place so that, so that it protects people from harm. It's for the same way that we have minimum wage in this country, because the market will not address that in itself, out of its, benevolence, especially when we have financialized actors who are beholden to their shareholders, and that people get bonuses so that they get, Thank
you. I have a chance for just one more quick question here. Sorry to cut you off there. So there's been stats from CMHC which show that we need 5.8 million new homes by 2030 to restore affordability. Do you believe the federal government is meeting its roles and responsibilities in getting to that number?
There are investment programs in housing through the National Housing Strategy. It's $8.2 billion over 10 years. We're 5 years in, and the results are not meeting the goal of addressing the housing crisis, decreasing chronic homelessness by 50%. And these new builds are not accessible by people who need it the most. And those are the people who are outlined and named in the National Housing Strategy itself. And so that is not helping Canada move towards the progressive realization of the human right to housing.
Madame Houle, Ms. Gray, Madame Ferrata, pour 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to correct my colleague because the minister has several times mentioned and said in communiques that there was a housing crisis. I am more worried by those parties who do not acknowledge that the right to housing is a human right. I want to ask you, why is it important to recognize that as a human right? Well, the right to housing is a central element. We know that markets are not working well. We have let housing be market-driven, but these are not individuals. So to be very direct, when we have a population or a group of people who are more vulnerable and living in precarious housing situations or who are homeless, it costs a lot of money financially, and it also costs a lot in terms of human potential. It costs a lot in terms of human dignity. And to build a housing system, to have regulations in place, to have funds and programs, we know that we have to think about them, we have to create them. We always have to do that around human rights. So when you talk about human rights, and do you think that we have legislated on that issue, legally speaking? You are the example. You're the first human housing advocate, federal housing advocate. So do you think that initiatives of banning purchasing of homes by foreigners or developing policies that are going to slow down this housing speculation would be able to help in increasing the number of homes as well as increasing the affordability of homes? Well, I know that in last year's budget, 2022, we mentioned investment with respect to financialization, but that for those abroad. But we wanted to speak today because we want to highlight the fact that financialization is not only outside of Canada but also inside Canada, and it has a negative impact. It affects the housing system as a whole, but it also affects the progressive achievement of human rights. So you must be happy to see that in the bill we decided to have a sort of fiscal reform, I believe, and it should be able to answer your concerns about mitigating the impact of financialization. Well, Madam, you made many proposals, and you know in our great country we have several jurisdictions that govern housing. Many of them are governed by the provincial jurisdiction, and you said that as a government we should be complementary in the sense that we should be where the provinces do not work. And so I want to know, how do you work with provinces, because the federal government on its own cannot solve the housing crisis. So I believe you agree with me on that. So how can we make sure that the provinces and the other arms of government are also at the table? Well, there must be political will, that's for sure, and we have to recognize that all levels of government, all arms of government, whether municipal or otherwise, have a role to play, especially with respect to zoning, building permits, etc. We need to have a plan, not only a strategy, not only a fund, but a real plan that will help us move forward and to focus that plan around human rights. So how can we do that concretely when the federal government doesn't have the scope of competence to govern the local housing law? Well, measures to date do not really help it meet its obligations. But personally, I work with provinces and municipalities. But when we look we are working on one systemic problem at a time, unfortunately, but we have been able to have agreements, bilateral agreements and trilateral agreements with respect to funds. We have the Housing Accelerator Fund. I'm sorry, I don't find the word in French, but concretely speaking, we need to lay down conditions when we come into agreements with provinces and municipal bodies. Well, there are members of the House of Commons who believe that we need to do less in terms of housing, that we should be less involved, that we should step away from the National Housing Strategy. Do you think that the National Housing Strategy, I understand when you say it's not perfect, but we understand that the intention is to increase the supply of housing. What do you think about the investment that we have to do in the next few years? Well, with respect to the National Housing Strategy Act, which says that housing is a human right, then we have to realign the national strategy so that it works alongside the law that was unfortunately written 2 years later. What I can say to this is that the country is a broad country and there are many invisible lines that exist, whether it's provincial, whether it's indigenous peoples' territories, whether it's municipalities, and manifesting the human rights to housing would change when we cross these invisible lines. And we know that people inside Canada migrate a lot, but we have to ensure that their rights are respected wherever they decide to live. This is where the federal government has a very important role to play. It's not its only responsibility, though.
Members, we now have bells ringing, so I need direction from the committee. We have 2 more 6-minute panelists. Okay, then we unanimous consent to proceed with Madame Chabot and Madame Kwan for 6 minutes each. Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Ms. Hull, I want to applaud you. You are the first woman federal housing advocate, so it's not nothing. The annual report that you produced and its complementary reports are easy to read. We can read them over and over again. And you are right when you place at the center of this topic human rights and the right to housing. That is guaranteed in international conventions, but also guaranteed by the fundamental rights of humankind. I thank you for that. There are many recommendations that you have made. We understand that at the federal level we can play a role because, yes, we have the National Housing Strategy. And in the annual report, you recommended to government that the strategy should simulate its programs in such a manner that it will prevent financialization of housing, especially with respect to rentals, and ensure that these programs do not contribute to increasing financialization. So, according to you, do you think that some programs of the National Housing Strategy foster, directly or indirectly, the financialization of housing? Well, there are programs for lending under the National Housing Strategy that would provide low-interest loans to encourage the building of housing for financialized stakeholders. So it's the people's money that is being used here. It's important to keep that in mind. The funds from the National Housing Strategies, which is $2.8 billion, is the taxpayers' money, and we have not seen this type of investment at the federal level in decades. And this money is being used by financialized stakeholders, and they make profit, or they take advantage of the fact that these investments are not covered by the communities. These are not social housing. They become individual wealth generating properties. So what would be your recommendation to correct that? Because there are several programs under the National Housing Strategy. It's about over 80 billion that has been invested so far. So are you saying that we should completely step away from providing support outside of this market and prevent people from making money with these strategies and maybe find a way of using not-for-profit investments? Yes, so proposals we're making is to stop subsidizing owners with that fund and stop giving preferential loans to these owners, and also to regulate lending institutions so that they can suspend loans to those entities that undermine human rights and undermine the right to adequate housing, so as to eliminate these financial incentives and to levy a tax on the profits. Also, we should also build and acquire, we should encourage the building of social housing, co-op housing as well, and not-for-profit housing. Scotiabank recently produced a report that recommended that Canada, in order to, it actually needs a way to control financialization, and one way to do that is to use a method that is used by many European countries, in terms that is having a percentage of non-for-profit housing that is rather high. The way it is now in Canada, the not-for-profit housing represents only 4% of homes in Canada, so there's a lot of work to be done in this respect. As such, the investments of the national housing strategies should really target the acquisition and construction of new social housing and cooperative housing. So if you had one or two programs that you can mention in the National Housing Strategy, or one in particular that needs to be focused on more, well, to redress this issue of financialization, I would look at the agreement, the program that the government is developing with the Federation, the Canadian Cooperative Federation, to build new co-op housing. That is something that we are impatiently waiting for. I know that they are ready since last June to work on that. I also think that, well, at least what I asked last November was to have a fund whereby non-commercial stakeholders can have an opportunity to buy buildings that are currently on the market, and as such ensure long-term affordability over time before the financialization as actors are able to buy them. But that program doesn't exist yet. Thank you, Madam Shabbat.
Go to Ms. Kwan for 6 minutes. Ms. Kwan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sorry, I heard a very loud sound. Is this okay now?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start now.
Yes, you're fine. I can hear you fine in the room.
Okay, sorry. Maybe it's just me. I was hearing a very loud echo of myself when I started to speak. So that's not happening now then. All right, so we'll start. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Housing Advocate for the work that she does and her office does, as well as her presentation today. I was particularly interested in the issue around the financialization of housing, and of course the impacts that she's already laid out. My question is going to be more centered around what actions can be taken to address this, and particularly as it relates to the housing crisis that we're faced with. The community has called for a moratorium to be placed on the acquisition of housing by, for example, real estate investment trusts or other corporate landlords. Is that something that, in your opinion, to the housing advocate, that's something that government should act on and that would actually help address the financialization of housing?
Mr. Chair, thank you so much for the question from MP Kwan. I think the government has a really important role to play, and there's a few things that they can do. So first one is creating an acquisition fund so that non-market actors such as housing co-ops and nonprofits and social housing can purchase properties for sale before they are financialized by actors or mechanisms of financialization. And these particular actors, the nonprofits, the non-market actors, will guarantee the affordability in perpetuity. That is a role that they play, that they take, they create community wealth instead of individual wealth. But before that, the federal government has a very important role to play in tracking ownership and measuring the impacts of financialization. For example, we need transparent data on beneficial ownership. And I was really pleased to see this need recognized in the pre-budget recommendations of the Finance Committee. We need to definancialize housing by support and expanding non-market housing, which I've mentioned a few times. We need to de-incentivize financialization by suspending subsidies and supports, such as favorable interest rates and tax treatments for financial firms, and regulate pension funds to require, that their investments be compliant with human rights, including the right to housing. And this is why we're here today, is to talk about how centering these decisions around human rights and the human right to housing can mitigate this harm. And we also need to strengthen controls and tenant protections. And the research shows that financialization thrives where tenant protections are the weakest.
Just to follow up on that, with the mandating, with the landlord, corporate landlords particularly, many of them use numbered companies to sort of hide the ownership behind that. One of the issues that tenants have raised is that they can't actually find out who is really their landlord. Should the government actually ensure that these corporate actors disclose their property ownership so that the tenants actually will know who is their actual landlord?
That's exactly right. Thank you for that. There is lack of transparency. The research of Martin August has been painstakingly taken in trying to even track down who the owners are of a lot of these purpose-built rentals. And because there is lack of transparency, and what she's able to report on, we suspect, is the tip of the iceberg. We're also hearing about private, financialized landlords that sell each other properties in order to artificially inflate the property values, and then use that value in order to acquire more assets. And when you're a tenant in these buildings, you don't know who your landlord is, and it's changing all the time. So there's no one to hold to account. There's no one to complain about. There's no one, we know that a lot of people own properties in Canada, individuals, but the scale of the financialization means that there is no one landlord to talk to. There is no one to hold to account. So this makes a huge difference in that transaction, in the quality of housing, in the deterioration of the state of the housing, and of course, to the evictions themselves.
Thank you. Should the federal government set up a national rental registry so that you can actually have access to this information and the disclosure requirement then?
The rental registry will play multiple roles. One, it's easier to track who owns the buildings. It's easier to track the financialization and the mechanisms, and also track the harm that some of these financial actors are causing in terms of the violation of the human right to housing with the result of eviction, of habitability and accessibility of these units. And it also will hold them a little bit more to account. I believe the ACORN research points to the landlord licensing as well as having a registry so that the units are inspected and that they are compliant to, again, the questions of habitability and otherwise without, so that whole mechanism will play a bigger role in ensuring that people's right to adequate housing is actually fulfilled or realized in terms of the quality of housing. Because there's a lot of people that are living in squalor right now, too.
Thank you. So I gather that you're suggesting that should be
Ms.
something
Kwan?
that federal government.
Ms. Kwan, your time is up. That concludes the first 6-minute round, and Madame Chabot has her hand up. Madame Chabot?
Ben là, je comprends qu'on a
Yes, I understand that we have a vote and then we are called to go to vote, but I'm rather worried because the second round of questions might be shortened as well. I would have thought it would be important to continue asking all the questions that we needed to ask to Madame Hull, because I think it's important to have her here and to give the allotted time to experts. So if we can't finish that today, I hope that we can continue or have another session, maybe an extra hour later on to continue with this discussion.
You, Ms. Chabot, did you have your hand up, Ms. Gray?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just where we're at, because another vote has now been called in the middle of our committee here. So we have to leave immediately to head to the House to vote. And then by the time we're back, it's going to be close to 5:30. So by the time the vote happens and then the 10 minutes to get back here. So we're almost back here at 5:30 because the vote's at about 10 after 5. It'll take, the time to vote. And then to get back here, we'll be back here at like 5:29. So
we can go
committee
to
goes till
6
5:30.
o'clock. We can go to 6 o'clock. We have resources to go to 6. It would be my intention to go to 6. The rules allow us to do that if there is 2 members of the opposition present and I have a quorum. So it would be my intention to continue the meeting until 6 o'clock when members return. Ms. Gray.
Okay, well, I guess if that's your intention, we wouldn't necessarily support that due to other commitments that we have. These 2 votes have thrown everything off, so it might be better to continue this on at another meeting. But
Well, again, we'd take direction from the committee as a whole. Ms. Kwan, you have your hand up?
I do. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm fine to go till 6 o'clock. However, I do want to note, though, that it does cut off the presentation and questions for both panels. And given the situation and the importance of this work, I would support Ms. Chabot's suggestion that the housing advocate, Ms. Hull, be invited back for another hour so that we can actually more fully engage with her with respect to this important issue.
The committee, we can discuss that. Right now, the schedule is set for today, so it would be my intentions to suspend until the vote is recorded, and then we would resume with the second panel round. They're ready to go. Then the committee can, by majority, choose its future direction, which we can consider the points you raised, Ms. Kwan, as well as Madame Chabot. So at this moment, we are suspended. We will resume with the second witness list following the vote in House of Commons. Yes. Okay. We'll suspend until the vote is conducted in the House and the members have the allotted time to get back in committee. Suspend. we do have a quorum present, and the 10-minute timeline has concluded since the vote was called in the House of Commons. So I will reconvene the meeting for the second hour witnesses. We do have a hard stop at 6 o'clock. And we do have 6 witnesses, 5 with opening statements, so you can see where it's going. With that, I want to welcome Dr. Martine August, Associate Professor, School of Planning, Jackie Brown, Researcher by video conference, Manuel Gabari, Researcher by video conference, Dr. Nimoy Lewis, Assistant Professor, who is in the room with us. And we have the other 2 as well here from Acorn Canada. Mm-hmm. Yes. From Acorn Canada, we have Tanya Burkhardt and Dr. Bohima Jam, Research Communications Coordinator. So I will begin, and I will just advise we only have 30 minutes left of committee time, so I'll be asking you to respect the 5-minute timeline on the opening statements, and the committee will make a decision on whether it's going to invite the witnesses back for questioning following this meeting. But at this time, I anticipate we're only going to get through the opening statements. So we will begin with. Where are we beginning? With Dr. August for 5 minutes. Dr. August, please.
Hi there. Hi, thanks to the committee for inviting me here today. My name is Martine August, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Waterloo. I'm also the lead for a series of reports commissioned by the Advocate on financialization of housing, and I'm here today with the authors of these reports. We've already been introduced today to the trend of financialization. This refers to the growing role of finance capital in the workings of the global economy in recent decades, and this trend is associated with the rise in global social inequality. The financialization of housing refers to the treatment of housing as an investment vehicle, and it involves the acquisition of mortgages or housing itself by financial firms and by investment vehicles, things like real estate investment trusts or REITs. And with this acquisition, they transform housing into a product for investors and provide new access for investors to profits through housing. In Canada, as the Advocate mentioned, this trend is on the rise. Since the 1990s, we've seen the massive consolidation of the ownership of apartments by financial firms. The top 25 biggest financial firms, and here I'm talking about real estate investment trusts, private equity institutions, asset managers, collectively, just the biggest 25 of them own 350,000 apartment suites. This is about 20% of Canada's purpose-built rental housing with over 6 units. And this is just an estimate. It doesn't include all financial firms, just the top 25. And it's limited by the lack of transparent data on ownership in this country, as was referenced in the last session. So why does this shift in ownership matter? Financial owners differ in how they treat buildings because they have a very particular business goal, which is to maximize value for their shareholders. The managers of financial vehicles are structurally incentivized to drive value for investors. If they do not prioritize certain levels of return, they will lose share value, they will lose investors, and reduce executive compensation, which is often tied to performance. So this means that in operating housing financial firms, they elevate profits above other goals, such as goals for affordability or enhancing tenant quality of life, and instead treat housing as a financial asset. In order to chase perpetual returns, financial firms often use aggressive property management strategies, which can reduce security of tenure, reduce affordability, and therefore run counter to the realization of the right to housing in Canada. In multifamily housing, one main approach that these companies use is called repositioning, in which buildings are repositioned to make more money for investors. In order to do this, firms can they can reduce their expenses. This can sometimes negatively affect tenants if it involves cost cutting or firing superintendents. And they can also raise revenues. And raising revenues ultimately comes from the pockets of tenants by charging more for amenities, adding on new fees, and especially by raising rents. And firms find that they can raise rents more if they have vacant units. So this drives them to systematically prefer to remove and displace existing tenants in order to try to get that higher rent when the unit is vacant. So financialization has negative effects on tenants. Displacement, which is caused by this pursuit of vacant units. This is a well-documented trend that's harmful. Raising rents increases the economic burden on tenants. And also the renovations and repairs that are used to drive those higher rents can make life very unpleasant. All these things generate stress, anxiety, health problems, and work against the realization of the right to housing in Canada. Beyond tenant level effects, this trend drives gentrification and intensifies patterns of social and spatial inequality, reducing affordability in our towns and cities. I'm sometimes asked how I can be so sure that financial firms are unique compared to other landlords. In line with other researchers in the US, I found that financial firms in the city of Toronto file for evictions at higher rates than other types of landlords, 2.5 times higher than owners of single buildings, 1.5 times higher even than similarly large private chains. And we can see them filing more evictions after buying a building. Looking at 10 years of data, a colleague and I found that after financial firms buy a property, eviction filings triple going forward. So if the previous owner filed 10 per year, financial firms file 30 per year going forward. And this is based on the analysis of 700 transactions over 10 years. I've also found that in Toronto, financial firms charge higher levels of rent, regardless of the neighborhood and regardless of building quality. So these findings show that yes, financial firms here in Canada are driving up housing costs and worsening affordability and intensifying housing insecurity through higher levels of eviction filings. This underlines the need for federal government action to better regulate this industry, to protect tenants, to secure affordable rents, and to stop the treatment of housing as a financial asset. Thank you.
Dr. August, now to Jackie Brown for 5 minutes or less.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak before the committee today. My name is Jackie Brown. I am a researcher with a master's degree in urban planning from York University. I've spent the last several years studying financialization, with a particular focus on seniors housing and long-term care homes. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed deep systemic issues in long-term care. Significant change is needed, and I would argue that mitigating financialization is a key avenue of reform. Long-term care is positioned at the intersection of healthcare and housing, serving one of Canada's most vulnerable populations. It is thus a critical locus of financialization and poses a distinct set of risks and challenges. I take the financialization of long-term care to refer to long-term care homes owned by investment vehicles such as publicly traded companies, private equity firms, and pension funds, and which are treated as an asset class to maximize profits for investors. The rise of financialized long-term care was facilitated by a broader trend toward privatization over the last several decades. As of 2020, approximately 22% of long-term care beds in Canada were owned by financialized companies. In Ontario, the percentage of financialized beds was as high as 32%. For retirement homes, the proportion of financialized beds is even more significant. The interests of investors are uniquely at odds with the provision of quality care and decent work in long-term care homes. In particular, financialized companies are heavily reliant on public subsidies for both day-to-day care and new home construction, yet they divert as much as they can into profits to pay their shareholders and investors. This occurs at the expense of resident and staff well-being. A recent report showed that between 2010 and 2021, publicly traded companies Chartwell, Extendicare, and Sienna Senior Living paid out a combined $2.3 billion to their shareholders. Dividend totals reached record highs in the first 2 years of the pandemic, even as the aforementioned companies received millions of dollars in emergency government aid. Meanwhile, several of these companies had the worst outcomes for residents. Of the 5 long-term care providers in Ontario with the highest mortality rates in the first 9 months of the pandemic, 4 were financialized. I have heard executives of these companies maintain that these dividends were paid out of resident accommodation co-payment fees and revenue from other business segments. However, beyond the fact that additional government support presumably enabled companies to circumvent a drop in dividends, the funneling of co-payment fees to shareholders points to a fundamental distinction between financialized companies and other long-term care providers. Municipal and nonprofit providers reinvest all profits in their homes, and in fact often supplement government subsidies with other funding sources to raise the standard of care. The evidence shows that seniors themselves have a clear preference for nonprofit homes where available, But massive wait lists mean that financialized companies are not forced to compete on quality of care. It is important to examine the ways in which government policies and programs privilege financialized companies. For example, subsidies for the construction of new long-term care homes in Ontario are typically paid out retroactively over a period of 25 years after a home is built. This poses much more of a barrier to small nonprofit providers, as financialized companies tend to have greater access to capital and can leverage existing real estate assets to secure financing with favorable terms. Financialized companies are premised on expansion. Even as the pandemic tore through long-term care homes in 2020, investors and analysts were asking executives how they could still ensure annual growth that year. As these companies grow by acquiring and developing more homes, they come to dominate the sector even further. I would like to highlight several opportunities for addressing this pressing issue. First, seeing as long-term care homes must be provincially licensed, provinces are in a position to restrict the proportion of licenses awarded to financialized companies. Saskatchewan has already made strides in this direction. After devastating COVID outbreaks at Extendicare's long-term care homes, including one in which 42 residents died, Saskatchewan took over all 5 of the company's homes in the province. Second, there is a need for greater capacity among public and nonprofit providers to make up for a reduction in financialized homes. There may be opportunities for provinces to provide planning, development, and financial support so that nonprofits can focus on delivering quality care in their communities. Third, a spectrum of housing options and adequate home care services should be available to better enable seniors to age in place. This is an important area of intersection between elder care and the financialization of housing more broadly, as providing alternatives to long-term care requires accessible, affordable, and secure housing. While the provision of long-term care generally falls to individual provinces and territories, the federal government can play a role through funding agreements and financial support conditional on nonprofit care. The federal government should also take steps to bring Revera, currently owned by the Public Sector Pension Investment Board and one of Canada's largest long-term care chains, under public ownership. The consequences of financialization are particularly dire in the context of long-term care homes, which serve some of our most vulnerable seniors. We must do everything in our power to guarantee them the highest quality of care. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Manuel Gabari.
I'm honored to be here with all of you as a researcher specialized in housing financialization. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights included the right to housing and the right to health as part of the right to an adequate standard of living. States were accountable for ensuring both rights. Most signatory countries, including Canada, developed national public health systems and vast social housing programs after the declaration. While public health systems are still working and the administration guarantees the right to health, most states dismantled social housing programs and the right to housing was not enforced anymore. Why? My hypothesis for that question is that housing became a financial product worldwide in the late 70s. In my paper, I explain how this phenomenon began with the end of the Bretton Woods system. Since then, financial products such as mortgage-backed securities allow financial investors to develop a huge market on housing and mortgages. These institutions put pressure on governments worldwide to dismantle the social housing programs with the aim of taking advantage of a new market. The global financial crisis challenged the housing system based on the general access to home property through mortgage indebtedness. The Bank for International Settlements, say the Bank for Central Banks, acts as regulator of the commercial bank system worldwide. This institution, based in Basel, Switzerland, identified the massive granting of mortgages without guarantees, defined as subprime mortgages, as the cause of the global financial crisis. Thus, the Bank for International Settlements established a new legal framework for mortgages known as the Third Basel Accord. All the members of the Bank for International Settlements must implement the regulations, which they did in 2013. The most important norm of Basel III was the restriction to the granting of mortgages without a consistent guarantee. Thus, Basel III indirectly forced banks to just grant mortgages with a 20% loan-to-value down payment. However, 4 countries dodged this restriction through public aid: Canada, UK, New Zealand, and Australia. The housing schemes follow the same pattern in these 4 countries. The CMHC provides mortgage loan insurances when the borrower cannot meet the standard 20% loan-to-value down payment. If a home has a value of $500,000, the borrower only needs $25,000 5% loan to value, instead of the $100,000, 20% loan to value, a standard of Basel III applicable in the rest of the countries. Through a fallacious discourse of family protection, the Canadian government has hindered the access to adequate housing. Mortgage loans make up the most significant component of household debt. Let's check the evolution of household debt in Canada after Basel III in comparison with other countries. The household debt is 80% GDP in the USA, Spain 63%, and Ireland 35%. In 2013, household debt was 82% in the USA, Spain 78%, and Ireland 93%. Thus, household debt has dropped in these countries in the Basel III implementation in 2013, minus 2% in the US, Spain minus 15%, and Ireland minus 58%. As we can see, the household debt trend since 2013 is contrary to the Canadian household debt trend. Household debt has dramatically increased in 2013 in Canada, plus 19%, reaching 112% GDP in 2020. From 2019 to 2020, household debt increased 9.38% Canadian GDP. This was the fourth largest increase worldwide. During the years that preceded the global financial crisis, household debt never increased more than 6% US GDP in 1 year. In the paper, I have compared the Canadian housing system to other housing systems of countries with similar socioeconomic conditions, UK, Germany, France, and Austria. The conclusion is that the countries such as Austria, which resisted the financialization of housing through the maintenance of vast social housing programs, present the best indicators in terms of access to housing, affordability, and prosperity for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabari. Have I got it right? Gabari?
It is.
Okay. Oh.
It is.
Thank you. Dr. Lewis, you now have the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, so thank you for having me here today. So my name is Dr. Nimoy Lewis, and I'm an assistant professor in the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Toronto Metropolitan University. My work primarily looks at the financialization of rental housing across this country, including the city of Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, and Montreal. My work primarily looks at how these particular types of landlords impacts the lives and neighborhood choices of Black Canadians across this country. So to begin, what is a financialized landlord? A financialized landlord is a purchasing company, privately held, an asset manager, or publicly traded company, either a real estate investment trust, which acquires rental properties at scale and applying financial logics, metrics, and priorities to generate returns to shareholders and investors. These categories includes asset managers, private equity firms, private equity firms, public pension funds, insurance companies, and real estate investment trusts, both private and public. So examples of an asset manager are Starlight Investment, Hazelview Investments, and in terms of a REIT, CAP REIT, Interrent REIT, and in terms of public pension funds, BCIMC, which is the investment management arm of the BC Public Pension Fund, which widely invests in multifamily housing, and AIMCO, which is the investment manager of the Alberta Public Pension Fund. But also the Federal Public Pension Fund of PSP also invests in financial intermediaries like Starlight Investment, who acquires multifamily properties and turn these assets into profit-generating assets. So in an examination of the Toronto rental market, we examined multifamily transactions over a 27-year period in where over 223,000 units have been transacted, and financialized landlords we've been able to document accounts for 65% of those units that have been transacted over the last 27 years in the city of Toronto. We estimate that this is most likely an undercount because, as some of my colleagues have alluded earlier, that a lot of these companies use very ambiguous corporate names and numbered companies to help conceal their true identity. And when we break down these core business practices of some of these landlords, we found that asset management firms over the last 27 years in the city of Toronto accounts for 40% of those transactions. Real estate investment trusts only account for 7% of those transactions. And while I make that statement not to vindicate REITs, REITs do apply the same acquisition and management practices, which we know undermine Canada's duty to fulfill the housing rights for all Canadians. So in understanding where these particular landlords are acquiring, we did a demographic analysis, and we found that 6.85% of all these transactions are happening in dissemination areas in where the Black population is between 50 and 80% in the city of Toronto. Those DAs actually only represents 1.1% of all the DAs in the city of Toronto. Dissemination areas are the smallest standard geographic census areas that make up a census tract. So financialized landlords account actually for 72.86% of all those units that have been transacted in those particular geographies. We also found that income appears to be influencing the acquisition patterns of landlords in the multifamily rental market, especially at the bottom end of the household income spectrum, in where the median household income is about below $76,500. Financialized landlords accounted for 66.37% of all those units in those particular dissemination areas in the city of Toronto. And when we look at in terms of displacement problems, financialized landlords, we examined evictions in the city of Toronto over the last 4 years between 2018 and 2021, in where there was approximately just under 63,000 evictions in the city of Toronto. And financialized landlords accounted for 42% of those evictions. And those evictions, in terms of evictions for non-payment of rent, financialized landlords filed just under 80% of those evictions for non-payment of rent. And when we look at one particular property which was purchased by Starlight Investment, as my colleague mentioned, once these landlords acquire these properties, there's a significant increase in evictions. So one particular property that was acquired by Starlight Investment in 2018 in the North Etobicoke community of the North Albion, Starlight acquired this property in late 2018, and by 2019, Starlight filed just under 500 evictions in this particular building, and 95% of those evictions were for non-payment of rent. And so when we do a demographic analysis in terms of evictions, we found that 10% of all evictions between 2018 and 2021 are happening in communities and in DAs in where the Black population is between 50 and 80%. And financialized landlords account for 73% of all of those evictions in those dissemination areas. And we know that 84% of those evictions are happening in high-rise buildings, which are 10 stories or more. And then when we actually increase the threshold to 70%, 5% of all the evictions in the city of Toronto are happening in dissemination areas in where the Black population is between 70 and 80%. And financialized landlords account for 85% of all of those evictions in those communities. And nearly 100% of those evictions are happening in high-rise buildings. Okay, and so where are these evictions happening? They're happening primarily in the northwestern quadrant of the city, in communities such as the North Albion community, the Jane and Finch corridor, and also the Chalk Farm community, which is located at the intersection northwest of the intersection of Jane and Wilson. But they're also happening on the downtown east side, including the same Jamestown corridor in the Sherbourne and Dundas area, but also in Parkdale. And when we look at income,
Dr. Lewis, you'll have to wrap up shortly.
This is my last. Okay. And when we look at income, we see that these communities are not only just predominantly occupied by Black Canadians, but they're also of low income as well. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Now for Acorn Canada, who is going to give the 5-minute statement? You have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Burkhardt, and I'm an Acorn Canada leader. Acorn is a national community union of low and moderate income people that fights for social and economic justice. Many Acorn members are living in rental units that are owned by financialized and big corporate landlords. In 2021, Acorn completed a survey of 606 renters across all landlord types. Of the 606 respondents, Acorn was unable to locate who the landlord was for 36% of respondents. Many landlords hide behind property management companies or number companies, and often tenants don't know who the landlord is. A high number of tenants, 37%, with financialized landlords saw their landlord change in the last 5 years. 79% of respondents said their unit needs some repair or urgent repair and maintenance. 16% of respondents living in units owned by financialized landlords reported not getting work done on time, and 31% stated not getting quality work done. 43% of tenants in financialized housing mentioned having roaches and other pests in their buildings. 27% of tenants who stayed more than 5 years said they never get quality work done. In Ontario, 19% of tenants with financialized landlords mentioned getting above guideline rent increases or AGIs. AGIs are commonly used by landlords to extract more money from tenants by doing cosmetic repairs. I'm now going to speak about some lived experience of ACORN members and myself with financialized landlords. A London ACORN member whose landlord is Starlight Investments says, I have moved into 3 different units in this building since August 2013, all because of repair issues. In the latest unit, there have been electrical issues, significant plumbing issues, wall damage, roaches, and bed bugs. The building has passed through 3 different owners, Timber Creek, Northview, and Starlight. They are now doing the common areas, ripping up the carpeting, repainting the walls, so waiting on an AGI in 2023. No work inside the units. A Calgary ACORN member who lives in a unit owned by Main Street Equity says, I moved in 13 years ago. Back then it was a lot different. Within the first year, we saw a huge turnover of managers almost 3 times. The bathroom sink fell because there was no support. I couldn't use the bathroom, no washing, no flushing. For the past year, I was asking for a sink change. My experience is no different. I moved in May of 2018. Starlight Investments bought the townhomes I live in from Wynn Family Properties in September of 2018. Rent was affordable at $15.99, but I had a leaking roof, no accessibility, fire safety issues, plumbing issues, electrical issues, mold, roaches, and more. Starlight displaced 3 buildings of tenants to fix building and fire code violations. Work was completed in 12 to 15 months, but tenants returned to units that were not properly renovated. Boardwalk purchased the property in April of 2022. There is still no safe accessibility, hallway ceilings leak, there is mold in the bathroom around windows and corners. Boardwalk ignores outstanding work orders and spends as little as possible to complete repairs. Safety is not a priority, and I don't drink the water because it smells and tastes bad and appliances are inefficient and old. The rent for a similar 3-bedroom is now $24.59 to $25.59. ACORN member testimonials highlight the following. Tenants are living with bed bugs, cockroaches, mold, and more. It is nearly impossible to get issues fixed. There is a huge staff turnover. Tenants feel helpless against wealthy corporate landlords who can afford legal representatives at formal hearings. As the tenant says, it's an unfair fight. Rent increases every year come consistently, especially in Ontario. Tenants shared getting AGIs back to back. Tenants have expressed stress and anxiety, adverse effects on themselves and their children, fear of displacement, and the inability to find adequate housing. Policy changes that ACORN would like the federal government to urgently consider. 1, CMHC should create an acquisition fund to enable nonprofit, co-op, and land trust organizations to purchase at-risk rental buildings when they come on the market. 2, immediately stop financialized and large corporate landlords from buying affordable housing or put a limit on how many units they can acquire. 3, the federal government needs to act on its commitment of taxing REITs. 4, build 1.5 million affordable homes and target it to people in core housing need. Mandate full rent control across all. Landlords always put money before people and clearly don't care. My question is, when will the federal government care? Thank you for having ACORN speak at this committee hearing today.
Thank you, Ms. Burkhardt. I just want to advise, because this is the end of our we have to stop at 6 o'clock, to advise the witnesses. I'm going to consult with the subcommittee of HUMA to make a decision on path forward. That is Ms. Gray, Madame Martinez-Serrata, Madame Chabot, and Ms. Cirillo as the subcommittee. We'll make a decision on rescheduling. And so we'll get in touch with the witnesses that appeared today. We did have votes in the House, so it did cut into the time. Ms. Chabot, I have to adjourn shortly.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. Just a short request. For the statements that we just heard, I want to thank the witnesses, but is it possible to have the speaker's notes? Thank you.
Thank you. We will provide the information that was given by the witnesses today to circulate. And as I indicate, thank the witnesses for appearing. I will make a decision in consultation with the subcommittee of HUMA, and we will contact you to indicate rescheduling if that's agreed to by the subcommittee. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.